The slap landed before she even finished her sentence. 1 second Vivian was standing at the nurse's station doing her job, 5 months pregnant, professional smile in place. The next, her head snapped to the side, her vision fractured white, and the only sound in the entire 14th floor of Hanguk Medical Center was the crack of Raymond Cho's palm against her cheek. Then silence. The kind of silence that only happens when 30 people witness something so wrong that their brains refuse to process it in real time. Vivian's hand flew to her stomach before she even felt the pain. That was the instinct that had arrived somewhere around month 3, not self-protection, but the other kind. The kind that made her press both palms flat against the small, firm curve of her belly even as she was still stumbling backward into the nurse's station counter, even as her ears were still ringing, even as she tasted copper on the inside of her lip.
She did not fall. She would not give him that.
What she gave him, because she had no choice, was the sight of her standing there, cheek burning, eyes bright, one hand on her unborn child, while he straightened his jacket with 2 unhurried hands, smoothed the front of his $3,000 suit, and smiled. Not a guilty smile. Not an embarrassed one. A satisfied smile. The smile of a man who has swatted something away and found the whole thing mildly entertaining. "Have the room ready," he said to no one in particular, "or I'll have every nurse on this floor reassigned." And then he walked away. His shoes clicked against the polished floor, slow and even, all the way to the elevator. He didn't look back once. To Raymond Cho, Vivian was already forgotten. Just another small inconvenience dealt with and discarded, barely worth the energy it had taken to dismiss her. What he did not know, what he could not possibly have calculated, because men like Raymond Cho never bothered to consider the full lives of the people they hurt, was that the woman he had just struck in front of 30 witnesses was married to the most dangerous man in Seoul. A man who would find out within the hour. A man who had never once in his life let something go. Vivian had worked at Hanguk Medical Center for 8 years. 8 years of overnight shifts and double shifts and shifts that bled together so seamlessly she sometimes drove home in the pale gray of early morning without any memory of the hour before. 8 years of watching people arrive broken and leave whole, or sometimes not leave at all. 8 years of being the steady presence in a room full of fear, the one whose hands did not shake, the one whose voice stayed level when everything else was going wrong. She had earned every year of it. She had grown up in Lagos until she was 12, then Abuja until she was 17, then arrived in Seoul on a scholarship to Yonsei University's nursing program because her mother, a midwife, had told her that healing was the most portable gift a person could carry. It crossed every border that money and language couldn't. She had believed her mother.
She still did.
She loved her work with the straightforward, uncomplicated devotion of someone who had never needed to romanticize it because the reality was already enough. Which meant that when Raymond Cho had walked onto her floor at 11 in the morning with the energy of someone who considered his own arrival an event, she had smiled at him the same way she smiled at everyone, professionally, warmly, with the full intention of helping him. She had told him, politely, that the VIP suite his father had been booked into was running 40 minutes behind schedule. The previous occupant had experienced a complication during discharge. Nothing serious, but protocols required proper documentation before the room could be turned over. She had offered to arrange a private waiting area on the same floor. She had offered to have refreshments sent up. She had offered 3 separate alternatives, each one reasonable, each one delivered with the kind of patient courtesy that her 8 years had made second nature. Raymond Cho had not wanted alternatives. He had wanted the room.
Now.
And when she had tried one more time to explain that the timeline was not something she controlled, he had looked at her the way someone looks at an object that has failed to function correctly. And then he had hit her. Vivian. Nurse Park Seoyeon was at her side before the echo had finished dying. Her colleague's voice was tight, careful, the particular tone of someone trying very hard not to scream. "We're calling security. We're filing a report right now. I know. You're pregnant." I know what he did, Seoyeon. Vivian straightened herself away from the counter. Her cheek was throbbing. Her hands were steady. "I need 5 minutes." She walked to the break room, closed the door, and stood at the sink with cold water running over her wrists, a trick a senior nurse had taught her in her second year. That cold water on the pulse point slowed everything down when you needed it slowed. She looked at herself in the small mirror above the sink. The redness on her cheek was already deepening. By evening it would be bruised. She thought clearly and quickly about what would happen if she filed a report today. Raymond Cho was the primary donor behind Hanguk Medical Center's East Wing expansion. His name was on a plaque in the lobby. 3 members of the hospital board sat on advisory committees tied to Cho Capital Group, his real estate and development conglomerate, which had a portfolio spanning 12 major buildings across Seoul and Incheon. His family had been photographed with a hospital director at 2 separate fundraising galas in the past 18 months. She knew how institutional protection worked. She had watched it work before, on smaller scales in smaller situations. A report would be filed. An investigation would be launched. The investigation would be thorough and careful and would ultimately conclude that the incident was a miscommunication, that tensions had been running high, that Mr. Cho deeply regretted any distress caused. There would be a settlement. There would be a clause. And Raymond Cho would return to this hospital and these corridors and this floor, and nothing would be different. She turned off the tap and dried her hands. Her phone was already buzzing. She did not need to check the name. She already knew. The message was 4 words. Are you all right? Not a question. A check. He already knew the answer wasn't yes. She typed back, I'm okay. Baby is okay. Don't move yet. I'll explain everything tonight. 3 dots. A pause. Then, Jay is outside. The moment your shift ends. She looked through the break room window, down 14 floors to the street below. The black Genesis G90 was already there. It had not been there before. She put her phone in her pocket, smoothed her scrubs, and went back to work. His name was Kang Min-jun, and the world knew 2 versions of him. The first version, chairman and founder of Kongsong Holdings, a legitimate conglomerate with interests in logistics, international trade, and private infrastructure development. 37 years old. Educated at Seoul National University and the London School of Economics. Donor to 3 children's hospitals, a public school renovation initiative in Incheon, and a university scholarship fund his late mother had established in her name. He was photographed occasionally at industry events, always in a dark suit, always composed, always slightly set apart from the crowd around him in a way that was difficult to articulate and impossible to miss. The second version was discussed only in specific rooms, in specific cities, by people who had either dealt with him directly or spent enough time in Seoul's shadow economy to understand its architecture. In those rooms, his name was said carefully, with a particular respect reserved for things that could hurt you. Kongsong Holdings was legitimate. It was also the visible surface of something much larger and much older, a network of operations that had existed in Seoul's underworld for 2 generations before Min-jun inherited and reorganized it, cutting the most violent threads, professionalizing what remained, building the legitimate side big enough and credible enough that the 2 versions of him existed in a kind of careful equilibrium. He had told Vivian all of this on a rainy Thursday evening, for months into their relationship. Sitting across a table at a restaurant she would later realize he had reserved entirely for the 2 of them because he had not wanted anyone to overhear. He had told her, without softening a single sentence. He had sat back when he was done and waited with the stillness of a man who understood that stillness was all he could offer. She had been quiet for a very long time. Then she had picked up her menu and asked if the Galbi gym was good here, because she'd had a craving for it all week. He had stared at her for 4 full seconds before something that started as disbelief became the realest smile she had ever seen on his face. She had met him 3 years before that in the ICU. He had been brought in at 2 in the morning, gunshot wound to the left shoulder, a secondary wound along his ribs, escorted by 6 men in dark clothing who scared every nurse on the floor into the far wall. Vivian had not gone to the far wall. She had put on gloves and crossed to him and assessed the wounds with the same focused calm she brought to every patient, and when one of the men in dark clothing stepped too close to the bed, she had told him, without breaking her visual assessment, to step back or leave the room. The man had looked at Min-jun. Min-jun had looked at Vivian with an expression she couldn't read yet and said, quietly, "Do what she says." They had all stepped back. She had cleaned the wounds, managed the bleeding, updated the chart, and was halfway through her post-stabilization notes when he said, "You're not frightened." "You're bleeding," she said. "I don't have time for frightened. Most people make time. Most people aren't your nurse." She finished the notation and looked at him for the first time as a person rather than a patient. "You should sleep. The anesthetic is going to make that decision for you in about 10 minutes anyway." "What's your name?" "Vivian." "Vivian," he repeated, like he was deciding something. "I'm going to take you to dinner." Absolutely not. He had been discharged 3 days later and sent flowers to the nursing station every morning for 2 weeks until she said yes. And she had said yes not because of the flowers, but because she had thought about him every single one of those 14 days and was tired of pretending she hadn't. They had been married for 2 years now. The baby was due in 4 months. And right now, Kang Min-jun was sitting in his office in the Kongsong Holdings headquarters in Uedo, 15 kilometers away, and he already knew something had happened to his wife. She did not tell him in the car. Jay drove in silence, and she watched the city past the window and pressed her hand against her belly and thought about the baby, who had started kicking 2 weeks ago with the enthusiastic energy of someone who had opinions about everything and wanted everyone to know. "Your father is going to be very intense tonight," she told her stomach quietly. "He's always intense. But tonight is going to be a specific kind of intense. I want you to know I have it handled." She felt a kick, which she chose to interpret as agreement. Min-jun was at the apartment when she arrived, standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows in his work clothes, jacket off, looking out at the Han River. He turned when he heard her. He crossed the room in seconds, took her face in both hands, and tilted it toward the light. The bruise on her cheek had come in fully now. She watched something move through his eyes like a current passing through still water, controlled, directed, devastating in its quiet. "Sit down," he said softly. "Tell me everything." She told him all of it. She did not minimize or protect him from any of it. The dismissal, the escalation, the slap, and then the part she knew would matter most. The smile as he walked away. The complete, comfortable, utterly assured smile of a man who had never once in his life faced a consequence. Min-jun was very still by the time she finished. "Raymond Cho," he said. "Cho Capital Group. His family funded the East Wing. He thinks it makes him untouchable at that hospital. His name is on a plaque in the lobby." Min-jun's voice was entirely level. "I've seen it. CEO, Min-jun. Look at me." He looked at her. "I need you to be smart about this. Not just angry. Smart." She held his gaze. "For me. For the baby. Whatever you do, I need you to come home after." Something shifted in his expression, the dangerous current settling, not disappearing, but going deeper. He took her hand and pressed it to his mouth, his eyes closing briefly. "I will always come home," he said against her knuckles. "That is not the question." "Then what is?" "The question," he said quietly standing, "is what Raymond Cho values most, and how thoroughly I can take it from him." He pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Rest. Let me work." She heard him in his study for 3 hours. Through the door, 2 voices, his, and at various points the voice of Do Hyunwoo, his most senior lieutenant, and the man who functioned as the operational brain of everything Min-jun didn't handle personally. She caught fragments. Financial exposure in the Incheon projects. Building permit irregularities in Songdo. Environmental compliance documentation. Get me the originals and whatever was submitted. Investors he cannot afford to lose. And I want everything on his personal accounts. Everything. She fell asleep on the couch and woke to Min-jun sitting beside her, his hand in her hair, his expression quiet in the low light of the apartment. "How long was I asleep?" 2 hours. He helped her sit up, tucked a pillow behind her back. The baby was kicking. "I watched for a while." She looked at his face. The dangerous current was still there, but alongside it now was something softer. The expression she had started to think of privately as his real face, the one that appeared only at home, only with her, only when he had put down whatever he carried in the world outside. "What did you find?" she asked. "Raymond Cho has been falsifying environmental compliance reports on 4 major development projects since 2021. Hundreds of residents moved into buildings that passed inspections they should have failed. He has been paying 2 officials in the Incheon City Planning Department to approve his documentation without review. He said it without heat, as though reading from a report. He also has significant personal debt, leveraged positions on foreign investments that went wrong 18 months ago. He has been using company funds to cover the gap, which his investors don't know. Vivian was quiet for a moment. How did you find all of this so fast? A slight tilt of his mouth. I have been building Seoul's information network for 11 years, Vivian. Finding dirt on a corrupt developer takes about 90 minutes. What are you going to do with it? First, the regulatory violations go to the right journalist and the right investigator simultaneously, tonight. By morning it will be public, and it will be irrefutable. He leaned back. His investors will move fast once the news breaks. His board won't survive a week. The city contracts he's been lobbying for will be frozen immediately. And the personal debt? I'm going to make sure the people he owes it to find out how badly his company is about to perform. He said it simply. He will have nowhere to run. Vivian looked at her husband for a long moment. Everything you've told me, the falsified reports, the inspections, that's real. That's evidence that was already there. Yes. You're not fabricating anything. I don't need to fabricate anything, Vivian. Men like Raymond Cho generate their own destruction. They just need someone to stop suppressing it. His eyes found hers. I am making sure the right people see what already exists. She nodded slowly. Then I can't argue with that. I know, he said. That's why I chose that approach. She laughed, despite everything, and leaned into him, his arm coming around her immediately. She felt him press his mouth to the top of her head and stay there. He hit you, Minjun said quietly into her hair. He put his hand on your face. He could have hurt our daughter. She stilled. We don't know it's a daughter. I know, he said simply, with the absolute certainty of a man who had decided. She was right about the doctor. It turned out 3 weeks later at the anatomy scan. A girl. Hanna, Minjun had said the moment the image appeared on the screen, his voice completely undone in a way that made the sonographer quietly pretend to be looking at something else to give them privacy. Hanna. It means one who is graceful. She is already graceful. Look at her. But that was later. The morning after Minjun made his calls, Vivian arrived at work and found the hospital transformed. Not physically. Structurally, it was the same building, same corridors, same elevator that took too long, same coffee machine on floor 7 that dispensed something that was technically coffee. But the atmosphere was charged in a way she felt the moment she walked through the lobby doors. People clustered in small groups, phones out, the specific energy of a workplace absorbing breaking news. Park Seon was waiting for her at the elevator. You need to see this. She held up her phone. The headline was from one of Seoul's largest financial news outlets. Cho Capital Group under regulatory investigation for major development projects flagged for falsified compliance documents. Beneath it, a secondary story. City officials in Incheon placed on administrative leave pending bribery investigation. It broke at 6 this morning, Seon said, walking with her toward the nursing station. The stock is down 24% already. 2 of his largest institutional investors released statements before 7 saying they're reviewing their positions. Vivian maintained a carefully neutral expression. There's more, Seon continued. The hospital board met at 7:30. Emergency session. There's a vote today on whether to remove the Cho Capital naming rights from the East Wing pending the outcome of the investigation. That seems appropriate. Director Song tried to call Raymond Cho twice this morning. No answer. Vivian tied on her lanyard and picked up the first patient chart of her morning. Let's have a good day, she said. She was with a patient on the 3rd floor at 11:15 when she heard it, the particular rise in volume from the corridor that meant something was happening that wasn't supposed to be happening. She excused herself, stepped out, and saw Raymond Cho at the end of the hall. He looked like a different person. Yesterday, he had moved through this building as though the corridors had been built specifically to accommodate him. Today his suit was correct, but his face was fractured. Eyes too bright, jaw working. The particular expression of a man who has spent a morning watching the architecture of his life develop cracks and has decided that moving fast is the same as moving forward. He was trying to reach the administrative wing. Two security officers were matching his pace, explaining with professional patience that the director was unavailable and that his access to the administrative floor had been suspended pending the board's review. I built this wing, he was saying, his voice carrying the particular crack of entitlement meeting resistance for possibly the first time. My name is on this building. You cannot. Sir, the board's decision is temporary and precautionary. I want to speak to Director Song now. The director has asked us to. Do you have any idea? His eyes swept the corridor and found her. She watched the recognition assemble itself on his face. Yesterday, she had been a uniform, a function, an obstacle. Today, maybe because she was the last face attached to a clear memory before everything started falling, maybe because something in his fracturing mind was searching for cause and effect, today he saw her. You, he said. He pointed. The gesture had none of yesterday's contemptuous precision. It was ragged. You're the nurse. From yesterday. Everyone in the corridor was watching now. Vivian met his eyes. She kept her voice completely level. Yes. I'm the nurse from yesterday. This is connected to you. He took a step forward. Security stepped with him. My company, this investigation, it started right after. Mr. Cho. Her voice was steady and clear. Your company is under investigation because of decisions your company made. I'm a nurse. I take care of patients. Your husband. Something shifted in his eyes. The desperate arithmetic of a man trying to make numbers add up. Who is your husband? Who are you? A phone rang in someone's pocket. Someone coughed. The corridor held its breath. Sir, the security officer said, taking his arm with more authority now, I need to ask you to come with me. Raymond Cho went, not because he wanted to, but because the two officers were already moving him and the fight had gone out of him in a way that was almost difficult to watch. At the elevator, he turned back, and for just a moment Vivian saw something beneath the arrogance and the panic, a flash of genuine bewilderment. A man who had lived his entire life inside a set of rules that had just, without warning, stopped applying to him. The elevator doors closed. Park Soo-yeon appeared at Vivian's shoulder. Karma, she said quietly, is so incredibly real. That evening, Min-jun was at the windows again when she came home. But his posture was different tonight, less taut, more deliberate, the satisfaction of someone watching a process unfold correctly. 71% of his stock value is gone, he said without turning. 3 investors have formally withdrawn. The city has frozen 2 of his active construction contracts. His personal bank has begun proceedings on a margin call he cannot meet. He turned. It has been 14 hours. Is it done? This part. He crossed to her, took her face gently in his hands the way he always did now, checking the bruise, which was yellowing at the edges as it healed. The next part happens when he has nothing left, when he finally understands the shape of what happened to him. Min-jun. I'm not going to hurt him, he said. I want to be very clear about that. What I want is for him to understand. There's a difference. She studied him. You want him to know why. I want him to know that the woman he dismissed as nothing had someone who considered her everything. His thumb brushed her unbruised cheek. That's all. Just understanding. She leaned into his hand. Okay, she said softly. Okay. 2 weeks later, she saw Raymond Cho sitting on the steps outside the hospital's side entrance. She almost didn't recognize him. He had lost weight rapidly, the kind that comes from stress and sleeplessness rather than intention. He was in ordinary clothes, dark slacks, a plain jacket, and he was sitting very still, looking at the ground, with the look of a man who has run out of motion. She had been about to pass. She should have passed. Instead, she stopped. He looked up. The recognition was immediate this time, and with it came something she had not expected to see on his face. Not anger, not calculation, but a raw, undefended exhaustion. I know it was you, he said. Your husband. She waited. I had people try to find out who you were after that day. He stopped. Tried again. Every door I went to in this city. Every person I called. Nobody would help me. Nobody would even take my calls. He looked at his hands. I've been trying to understand how this happened so fast. Do you understand now? A long pause. Your husband is Kang Min-jun. She said nothing, which was its own answer. Raymond Cho closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, something in his face had shifted. Not broken exactly, but open in a way it hadn't been before.
Raw.
I didn't know who you were, he said. When I didn't know. That's exactly the problem, Vivian said quietly. You shouldn't have needed to know who I was. I was a pregnant woman doing her job. That should have been enough. He looked at her for a long moment, then down at her stomach, visible now even under her coat, unmistakable. Something crossed his face that she recognized, distantly, as shame. He opened his mouth.
Closed it.
The black Genesis pulled up to the curb. The door opened and Kang Min-jun stepped out, immaculate, composed, his eyes finding Vivian first, checking her in that way he always did, before they moved to the man sitting on the steps. He walked to her side and stood there, one hand settling at the small of her back. Raymond Cho got to his feet slowly. Standing, he looked smaller than he ever had. He looked at Min-jun with the expression of a man who has finally arrived at the thing he was afraid of. Kang Min-jun, he said. Raymond Cho. Min-jun's voice was pleasant. Precisely, carefully pleasant, the way very cold things can feel like nothing at all until they've already done damage. I've been waiting to introduce myself properly. I didn't know she was your wife. I swear to you, if I had known. If you had known, Min-jun said, you would not have hit her. Which tells me that your actual belief is that it was acceptable to hit a woman you believed had no one to protect her. He let that sit for a moment. That tells me more about you than the slap does. Cho had nothing to say to that. You're going to face legal proceedings, Min-jun continued, evenly. The evidence against your company is documented, verified, and already in the hands of investigators who are not influenced by your donor relationships. You will be held accountable for the building violations and for the residents who were endangered by them. That process will take its course without my involvement because it doesn't need my involvement. The law, functioning correctly, is enough. He stepped slightly closer. Not threatening, just present. What I wanted you to understand personally, the reason I'm standing here, is this. She was worth more than everything you had. She has always been worth more than everything you had. And you treated her like she was nothing. He turned to Vivian, and every degree of coldness in his voice dissolved in the space of a single breath. Ready to go home? Yes, she said. As they walked to the car, Cho called after them. His voice had the stripped, hollow quality of a man with very little left to lose. Why didn't you just destroy me? Why go through all of this instead of? Min-jun paused, looked back over his shoulder. Because destruction takes a second, he said. Understanding takes longer. I wanted you to have time to think about what you did and exactly why it cost you everything. He held Cho's gaze for one more moment. Use the time well. The door closed. Jay pulled away from the curb. Inside the car, Vivian was quiet. Min-jun took her hand. Are you all right? He asked. I watched you do that and felt almost sorry for him. She exhaled. Is that strange? No, he brought her hand to his mouth. It means you are exactly who you are, which is the thing I am most grateful for in my entire life. She leaned her head against his shoulder. Outside, Seoul moved past the windows, lit and layered and endlessly alive, the city that contained both of them, all of their versions, everything they had been and were becoming. Han-na, she said quietly. She felt him smile against her hair. Han-na, he agreed. 5 weeks later, at 39 weeks, Vivian went into labor at 4 in the morning. Kang Min-jun, who had dismantled a man's empire with 3 hours of phone calls and faced every threat to his organization with the composure of someone who had been built for exactly that, completely fell apart.
Jay.
Hospital. Now. He was already on his phone. Already at the wardrobe. Vivian, can you walk? Should I carry you? I'll carry you. I can walk, she said, through a contraction she was managing with exactly the disciplined breathing her prenatal class had taught. I've been walking for 39 years. You're in labor. I'm aware. Min-jun, where are your shoes? Yes. Shoes. He found them.
Sat on the bed to put them on.
Stood up immediately. Where is your hospital bag? By the door. Where it has been for 2 weeks. Right. He crossed to her, took her face in his hands, and looked at her with an expression she had never seen on him before. Not the controlled concern, not the careful love, but something completely unguarded. Open, almost frightened. I need you to tell me you're okay. I'm okay, she said softly. We're okay. Let's go meet our daughter. Han Kong arrived at 9:47 in the morning, 7 hours later, preceded by a labor during which Minjun held Vivian's hand without letting go once, apologized to the attending physician once after snapping at her during a tense moment, and was overheard by 2 nurses telling his wife she was the bravest person he had ever known in a voice so rough with emotion that one of the nurses had to excuse herself from the room. When the doctor placed Han Na in his arms, he stopped moving entirely. He stood very still, looking down at her, this small, complete, entirely new person, with an expression Vivian would remember for the rest of her life. Not performance, not management, not the careful composure of a man who had built a life around controlling what he showed the world. Just a man, holding his daughter for the first time, completely and entirely undone. Vivian, he said, very quietly. I know, she said. I know. He sat beside her on the bed, Han-na still in his arms, and pressed his forehead against Vivian's temple. Thank you, he said. For her. For us. For everything. She put her head on his shoulder. Their daughter made a small, exploratory sound. Not quite a cry, more of an announcement. The sound of someone who had arrived and wanted everyone to be aware of it. Minjun laughed, startled, and the laugh became something close to a sob, and he pressed his mouth to Han-na's forehead and stayed there. In the months that followed, Raymond Cho's legal proceedings moved forward exactly as Minjun had said they would, methodically, without his intervention, because the evidence was irrefutable and the investigators were doing their jobs. The residents who had lived in compromised buildings received inspections and settlements. The officials who had taken bribes lost their positions and faced charges. The investigation expanded as investigations tend to do when the first layer is removed, and by the time it concluded, 6 months later, the full scope of what Cho Capital had been doing and for how long had been laid out in public record. Vivian read the final summary in the newspaper one morning over coffee while Han-na slept against her chest in the soft carrier Minjun's aunt had sent from Busan. She thought about the 8 families whose names appeared in the report, residents who had been displaced, one of whom had been injured when a structural issue in a Songdo building caused a partial floor collapse that the original inspection would have caught and flagged. She thought about what it meant that the evidence had been there all along, waiting for someone to stop suppressing it. She thought about a slap in a hospital corridor and the chain of consequences that had unspooled from it, not just the ones intended, but the unintended ones. The ones that had given 8 families something they hadn't been able to get before. Minjun came in from the kitchen, found her reading, found her expression, and sat beside her without speaking, his arm coming around her and Han-na both. Are you all right? He asked. I'm thinking about the people whose lives got better because of something that started with the worst moment of my year. He was quiet for a moment. Does that feel strange? It feels like something I don't have a word for yet. She turned her head to look at him. You didn't set out to get them justice. No, he said honestly. I set out to get you justice. That it helped others was, he paused. You've told me before that mercy and justice aren't the same thing. But maybe sometimes they're adjacent. Sometimes, she agreed. Han-na stirred, made her announcement sound, and then settled again. They both looked down at her. I keep thinking, Minjun said, about what kind of world we're building for her. What kind of answer have you come up with? One where people face consequences. And where we choose mercy anyway. He looked at Vivian. You already knew that.
You've always known that.
I'm still learning it. She leaned into him. You're doing fine, she said. When Han-na was 3, she came home from nursery with a scraped knee and tears drying on her face because a boy had pushed her for her toy. Minjun's first response, before Vivian had even finished the sentence, was to reach for his phone. Minjun. He looked up. She is 3 years old. Someone pushed our daughter. On a playground. This is childhood. She crossed to him, removed the phone gently from his hand, set it on the counter. What she needs right now is not for her father to fix the problem. She needs to learn that she can handle it herself. She held his gaze. Teach her. Don't do it for her. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once and crossed to Han-na and went down on one knee in front of her, so they were eye to eye. Han-na, listen to me. She looked at him with her wide dark eyes. His eyes, everyone said, though Vivian privately thought she had inherited the expression that went with them from her mother. You are strong, Minjun said. You are brave. And when someone takes what belongs to you, you stand up straight, look them in the eye, and you say no.
Can you do that?
Han-na considered this with the gravity of a 3-year-old treating a serious matter seriously. Then she nodded. No, she said experimentally, with considerable conviction. Exactly like that, Minjun said and smiled. The next day, she came home triumphant, her chin at a defiant angle that Vivian recognized from somewhere, and announced that she had said no and the boy had backed down, and she would like extra rice at dinner as a reward. Minjun gave her extra rice and looked at Vivian over Han-na's head with an expression that was helpless and proud, and so full of love it needed somewhere to go. That, Vivian thought, watching them. That is what this has always been about. Later, when Han-na was older and old enough for honest conversations, she asked her father, with the blunt directness of a child who had inherited her mother's refusal to be managed, what he actually did. They sat her down together. I made choices I'm not proud of, Minjun told his daughter. I built something that wasn't always good. And then I met your mother, and I understood what I wanted to build instead. He held Han-na's eyes. I'm still building it. Every day. Are you a good person? Han-na asked. I'm a person trying to be good, he said. That's different. And I think it matters that I know the difference. Han-na thought about this with characteristic seriousness. Then, Amma says everyone deserves a chance to change. Your Amma is right. Are you changed? I'm changing, he said. Every day a little more. Han-na hugged him with her whole small body, the way children hug when they mean it completely, and Minjun held her and looked at Vivian over their daughter's head, and Vivian saw what was in his eyes clearly. Not the careful composure. Not the controlled surface. Just him. Years later, when someone asked Kang Minjun at an industry dinner what the most significant risk he had ever taken was, expecting an answer about markets or deals or the years when his world had been a different kind of world, he smiled and said, telling the truth to a nurse who had just saved my life and then waiting to see if she would stay. And somewhere at the same table, Vivian laughed and said, I made you wait 3 weeks. 14 days, he corrected. 14 days is 3 weeks when you're counting. I was absolutely counting. Han-na, visiting her parents at the table, rolled her eyes with the profound, expressive energy of a child who has witnessed this particular exchange before and has opinions about it. They drove home through Seoul, lit and restless and endlessly layered, the city that held all their versions, every iteration of who they had been and who they were still becoming. Han-na fell asleep in the back seat. Minjun drove. Vivian watched the Han River pass in the window, the lights catching its surface, breaking and reforming. Do you ever regret it? She asked. Any of it. The way it started. Raymond Cho being destroyed? All of it. The whole chain of things. He drove for a moment in silence. Then, I regret that you were hurt. I will regret that for the rest of my life, that I wasn't there, that someone put their hands on you, that you had to be afraid for our daughter in that moment. He glanced at her. But what came after? The accounting?
No.
Not one piece of it. Good, she said simply. And you? She looked at Han-na in the rearview mirror, sleeping soundly, one hand curled under her chin in a gesture that was entirely her father's, an inheritance she didn't know she carried. No, Vivian said. Not one piece of it. He reached across the console and took her hand. Seoul moved past the windows. The river ran. Their daughter slept. And that, all of that, from the slap to the reckoning to the daughter named for Grace, was the whole of the story. A story that started with a man who believed he was untouchable and ended with a family that proved him right, just not in the way he had intended. Not untouchable because of money or power or fear. Untouchable because of love. because of what two people had built in the years after a wounded man in an ICU decided to tell the truth, and a steady-handed nurse decided to stay. If this story moved you, hit the like button and subscribe for more, and drop a comment telling me your favorite moment. I'll see you in the next one.